I want you, Kevin, to introduce yourself. I will put a video of you and stuff, but I want to introduce yourself, how you get into puppetry, who are you, and where are you right now, and all of those deep questions about who is Kevin.
Does sound very deep. Who is Kevin? I don't know, but I'm me. And some of the technical things. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This little video here shows kind of how I started. Right there, that's me with a book, because I started with books and creative writing and going to schools all over Michigan, the Midwest. And my goal, my hope was to get kids excited about writing, about their imagination. And that's about 20 years ago is when I started. And I started at first with a lot of puppetry and movements that told kids what to do, but it wasn't necessarily a relationship with the audience. In these clips here now, we kind of went further. Another puppeteer, my cousin Justin and I were doing this together, more puppets, and realizing, what can we really do with puppets? In fact, at first I used to have this PowerPoint and this presentation. It was very much a talk. And then as it unfolded, though, it's more about the movement, the playfulness, and then the relationship, especially with the audience. I realized, man, when we don't know what's going to happen, so much more energy. And then I said, you know what? Let's get rid of all these puppet theaters. I made 4 different puppet theaters over the year. And this one right here is the 4th one, where it was made with a trunk and everything was contained to say, okay, I got this trunk. Push it, roll it, open it up, make it part of the show. And all of this, by the way, as every viewer knows watching this, with puppetry, with art, is such a slow and crazy and fun adventure, and letting it unfold, right? More puppets, more interactivity on the street, schools, festivals. Basically, to answer your question here in a nutshell, a bunch of years of just figuring it out and making it this back and forth relationship. And right here, it's going to now go to then saying, forget the trunk and all the stuff, and just say, keep it simple in a suitcase. And, you know, so that process of an artist of, you know, trying this and then getting exhausted from it, or feeling like I keep doing this over and over. So right now it's just little socks and bobbers and different things. So that's the video there. I'm rambling. I tend to be like, right. But maybe that kind of answers your question in a nutshell, right? Yeah. Of puppets, books. Let me say this. I think of everything as an idea. And so whether it's words, music, art, puppetry, it's an idea. So how do you convey, how do you communicate, how do you then, more so for me personally, how do you interact? In fact, a good friend of mine, Jim Dagg, his band is called Scribble Monster. And I remember he said to me years ago, when performing, if you think of it as playing catch, and you throw the ball, and they got to throw it back, and then you throw it, and they throw it back. And so if the audience in this case is not throwing it back, all you're doing is throwing stuff at them, right? And then they're like, ah. But when you have this relationship back and forth, it's fun, it's musical. I could go off on all kinds of tangents. Like Jim Gill is a children's musician who believes everything he does as a performance is play. And the same thing, it's that relationship. And so for me, that's where I thrive, is that relationship. And I want to say one more thought before I go off. Now, that's just one approach, right? Because you could also say, forget all that and say, no, we are the performers. We are going to create this amazing thing that, yes, you are the audience and you watch. And I respect that too, because, right, theater, film, you watch a film, like you see the masterpiece. Bob Nathanson, if you know him through Puppeteers of America, he's a funny guy. I read an article where he was reading about that. Like, no, you don't hire a plumber and say to the plumber, hey, I want this to be an interactive job. Can I help you clean the crap? Wait, no. You're the one I'm hiring, so you do the work, right? So it's just, there's no right or wrong, right? It's just, what is it that you want to do? Is it as a performer, as an artist, you know, present this brilliantly, and that's awesome? Or is it play? Is it a relationship? Is it all the above, right? So I'm talking too much. That's my, what was the question? Who am I? I'm a guy that gets overwhelmed with ideas and excited and synergy, the relationship with other artists. I love the collaborative process, to be able to start with an idea and think, okay, here's the idea. This would be so much better if I talk to Danny about this. Or my wife and I work together on a real specific basis with the show we're doing now. And my friend Michael and all of us, and with my job, I work for Kent District Library, and it's an amazing organization, and the people and my colleagues and Sarah and Joanne and Adam and Kalaine and everybody. Grace, where we all bounce ideas and we say, let's do this, let's do that. And then, oh my gosh, you would play guitar so much. And I can strum a couple little things, or I can grab a kazoo and go, but how do these ideas ultimately go through that process to become something? I better stop.
That's so beautiful. Like, Kevin, it's kind of, you resume at the same time the beauty of art is the role, the interaction, what's puppetry at the same time. And it's so beautiful. I feel you are the right guy to be in front of children and transmit this passion to them and just inspire. That's so interesting. And are you ready for the deep question of the Puppet Podcast?
I hope. I'll do my best.
And it's funny because this became an archival of knowledge about puppetry. And the first question is the why.
Okay.
But you maybe already answer it, but I want to hear it.
Okay.
What makes the art of puppetry an art that you cherish?
The art of puppetry I cherish because I really have no other choice. It chose me. And I say that meaning, for me personally, like I said earlier, I think of everything as an idea, and puppetry just slowly creeped up on me. When I was young, I was aware of puppets, but the honest thing for me is it just puppets, same thing with this, same thing with that. I didn't know much of anything as a kid. And my mom, just as a very side note, she might be watching, I think I let him know, she didn't like me till I was 10. And lovingly, I love you, Mom, and she loves me. And it's a joke. She's like, yeah, you drove me crazy. You're always bored. And you'd always like, I'm bored. What do I do? What do I do? And so it was, I think, that internal desire as a kid, like, what do I do? I got to create. So for me, the puppetry, I'm trying to stay focused on your question, specifically, I started with, like, for my professional career, quote unquote, for me, it started with creative writing, poetry. And then the poetry led to music, working with friends to turn these poems into songs. And then I worked for West Ottawa Public Schools at the time, and the secretary at the school, her mom made puppets for their elementary school broadcast news. And I remember thinking, who made these puppets? Like, oh, that's Nancy's mom, Betty. Okay. So I was making this book of poetry and the songs. And like I said, puppetry kind of found me, where it was, I should talk to Betty about a puppet. Hey, this character that's kind of maybe going to be on the cover of the book, what if that was a puppet? And I had no idea what to do with the puppet when I had it made. Betty made the puppet. It's like, what am I going to do with this? Like, I don't know. And so I just kind of started to discover it, or like I said, I would prefer to say it kind of discovered me. And I think with characters too, with puppets, those puppets really do introduce themselves to you, and you're trying to find it and let it unfold. And sometimes you have an idea and you're like, that didn't work at all. But then the character's like, what? Oh, that's what it is, etc. So that's for me the puppetry story. Why do I cherish puppetry? Why do I love puppetry? It's fun. It makes it interesting. Kids, in fact, when I first, like I said, started in this career, so to speak, of an artist, I was going to schools talking about writing. I was hired, so to speak, or I first started just, doing it. It was part of a class, poetry class in college. But when I started to realize, wait, people get hired to go to schools and do these author talks? And how does this work? And so I did. It was part of the class assignment actually to do it. And so I went to do it. And then that's where I started realizing, wait, and someone called me one day. I remember specifically they called and said, hey, how much do you charge to do that writing poetry thing you do? Like, I can get paid to do this. And then meeting people who've done it, Jane Stroshin, Mark Herrick, and Tom Woodruff, two very specific people. When I was 20, 21, 22 years old, whatever it was, they said, yeah, this is something that we do. And life is just right. Those connections, you got to talk to this person. And so many amazing people who helped me get started. And then, like I said, from the poetry to the music, back to the puppetry, what I realized though, is that the puppetry is what really drew the connection for the kids. Yes, there's authors that can stand there with nothing and just captivate you with their words. It's amazing. But for me, I realized the puppetry is what's really making this pop, and specifically for me, the puppetry and the music. So it wasn't so much, it was not a traditional puppet show or production. It was me with a puppet but not as a ventriloquist. It was recorded music at first and puppet lip sync. And I think I said that I used to just very much put out information to an audience. But then, and that was for 10 years that I did that. And I remember at one point too, just feeling like, I'm just worn out from doing this, and it's fun, but I'm just doing the same thing over and over. And it was I could ramble on for a long time, but it was a very specific kind of turning point in my life. Art Prize is what it's called. And I was part of this big art project where I started to learn and push myself and realize, wait, the relationship with the puppet to the audience and what we can do. And really a puppet concert. I was doing, for years, I didn't do any of the vocals for the puppets. It was all recorded. But once I started doing the vocals and could really interact with the audience and be spontaneous, that was the big key too. Instead of just the same thing over and over, it was this relationship. And so that is, like I said, a long, sorry. Critter, what are you doing, Critter? Sorry, this is Critter. You recognize these, of course, these are Peepers by Hobie Ford. And he was been hanging out here for a long time. So Critter, oh, come on. He's doing his trick here. He loves this. You weren't supposed to be in the interview here, but Critter, are you, sorry. Okay. You gotta go, buddy. Sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm rambling. Thank you for letting me ramble.
That's so perfect. And we have people who talking also on the chat. Yeah, that's perfect. This is like funny to bring a puppet like this. And yeah, so we have Kristen to say, I love hearing how.
Hey, from Hawaii. Hello, friends.
Yes, and we have also Fernando who asked to Kevin, congrats for your work. What do I have to do to become a puppeteer? Oh, that's a good question. So let's bring it to the floor. That's the best thing about it. I
love it. Fernando, thank you for that question. And Caroline, I've enjoyed following your show and watching it and hearing how people answer these questions. And it's beautiful. There's so many answers, right? And for me to answer that question, it would be, and some of your guests have said this too, like, just do it, just go. And there's so many Puppeteers of America, UNIMA, you mentioned at the start of the broadcast, workshops, local guilds, all the different, industries that people know of with UConn and puppet, conferences and this and that. There's a lot of resources to go to. That's amazing and meaningful. Ultimately, my world, my experience, right, is just doing it, going, learning, networking with other puppeteers. And then you really see a show or a program and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I never thought of that? Right. And then you want to be inspired, not to copy it, but be inspired by it and take it further or interact with that artist and say, wow, this, that, right? Could ramble on with all kinds of amazing puppeteers. Just learn, apprentice, mentor, connect, ultimately do it. Just do it over and over and over. For me, going to schools and doing the programs over and over, that's where I really gained most of my confidence
Yeah. You feel it's not like a specific field of study, like you can just learning by doing it, in your opinion?
For me, that's been my perspective.
It
starts with doing it, but then reaching out and realizing, hey, based on your personality, based on how you learn, would you benefit from signing up and going into a whole puppet program? Would you benefit from going to a workshop, reading a book, reaching out? So it's really just how you learn is what's going to be most effective. And my perspective, though, was, like I said, I started with writing poetry and then music and the teamwork and the synergy and also thinking like an entrepreneur. It's also the business aspect of, okay, I've got these ideas. Now, how do I go further? How do I learn this? So many books you can read and study, and now, the classic story of technology these days is so different than what it was before. And so it's just realizing what resources are out there. It's putting in the time, but that applies to anything you do, right? Yeah. Just put in the time. Do it. Make a lot of mistakes, right? Put yourself in situations where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm way over my head and I failed miserably. But you didn't fail. You learned. You gained experience. You realized that didn't work. And then you realized that worked amazing. It was a glove and these little things in people. In fact, this character, this idea of what we call Critter, my cousin and I, like I said earlier, worked together for a few years. Back to Art Prize. We did this. It was this 19-day art festival. It's where I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we built this puppet theater. It was out of old doors and it was waterproof and rainproof and everything. And we just sat for 19 days at this festival with puppets, street performing. People came and went, no schedule. We just sat there for 8 hours a day. And then at one point we're like, you know what? What if we put this, and I was kind of overexposed. I should have a darker material here. But we put a little sign next to this puppet that said, "Ask a yes or no question." And so we just sat there and people came by and like, we'd point like you, and then they'd point at the sign and it would, people would say, "Are you having a good day?" Yay! And then they'd say, "What time is it?" "Oh, wait, that's not a yes or no question." And so it just became this interesting psychology in this, all we got to do is sit here and they do all the work, right? So it's just, we wouldn't have thought of that unless we were in the situation of, what can we do? And again, we had different puppets and songs and that's where, again, we gained so much, you just gain all that street knowledge of how people respond, how they enjoy, how they laugh, how they don't laugh, how they heckle, what you do when they heckle, etc.